My name's Rebekah Hall. I'm the CEO and founder of Botanic Lab, one of the pioneers here in Europe of the CBD consumer products market, and you're listening to Professionally Cannabis.
Where do they go, the smoke rings I blow each night?
Hello, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Professionally Cannabis. I'm Oscar Houseman, and with me is Johnny Weiser. Although, when I say with me, I don't mean physically with me, because I, like much of the rest of the world, is at home. I is at home. Jesus wept. My grammar is not at home. But we're self-isolating now, so for listeners, please forgive us if the audio quality is not quite at the same high standard that you're used to.
Yeah, well, typically we record in a studio, where now we are recording over the interwebs. We have done a lot to try and ensure that the sound quality is as we'd hoped for. But bear with us if at times it isn't the same studio level quality that you're used to, but I think you might be pleasantly surprised. Oscar, how are you finding your isolation days?
Well, I'm struggling to see the difference, actually, because I was always a bit of a homebody. And now no one even asked me to go anywhere. So really, for some of us, it's pretty good. In all seriousness, I think it's one of these things where everyone's got to pull together a bit of the Blitz spirit, do your bit by staying at home, not spreading this horrible disease that could have such a negative impact on loved ones and the world at large. And really, I don't know, get used to not going out, because I don't think this thing's going anywhere.
No, absolutely. I think at least for a few weeks we'll all be homebound. Actually, my partner is a teacher, so this last week we've both been working from home together. It's been interesting to be sat next to her while she delivers lessons over the internet, actually, with one of her classes. They've been studying Great Expectations over the last few weeks, and our listeners must have great expectations of our episode today. So without further ado, Oscar, could you tell our listeners who this next episode is with? And forgive the dad joke.
I actually love the dad joke. Are you expecting? But our guest today is Rebekah Hall of Botanic Labs, a leader in the CBD drinks industry. She's got a whole host of stories. I was particularly enamored with some of the product names as well. And so let's hear it from the horse's mouth and bring on Rebekah.
Where do they go, the smoke rings?
Today, I'm happy to say that we're joined by Rebekah Hall, founder and CEO of Botanic Lab, one of the most well-known CBD drinks companies based out of the UK, sharing shelf space with many of the best-known non-alcoholic drinks and stocked in a plethora of high street stores. I think the phrase, "you've smashed it," is wonderfully apt here. What do you reckon, Rebekah?
That's very kind of you. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Professionally Cannabis, Rebekah. So I think, well, we're talking about CBD drinks here, sorry. So it's fine for us to start with our traditional question of what led you to the plant?
It's a very, very apt question, I think. Well, my background actually is in investment banking. I had a 10-year career in investment banking in M&A, and I wanted and had an entrepreneurial itch to start my own brand and business. And I ended up starting a business in consumer products, in drinks, but I had no sort of great affiliation to drinks. It was more a calculated capitalist move on my part, which is not always the palatable response to that question. But health and well-being, I saw as an area that was hugely on the rise. And within that, food and drink was particularly interesting. And there was a real trend towards young challenger brands really coming into the market and providing consumers with new trends and things that they wanted to see, where the big brands have got quite tired. So I launched a functional drinks brand here in the UK with a set of products that were quite different from what we do now. But the core tenet is very similar to it is taking a central functional plant ingredient that usually has a deep cultural heritage in some part of the world and creating an interesting, healthy drink around that. But where the sort of the normal markers of health, low sugar, low calorie, are not the most interesting thing about their drink. They're kind of an intrinsic given in what we do. But the real interest is in that kind of functional plant ingredient. And, during the course of that process, we built a good customer profile, a nice brand, and become synonymous with doing some quite unique and pioneering things with drinks and with interesting plants. So I guess when CBD and cannabis started to become much more in the kind of mainstream consciousness, particularly in North America, I was very interested in it, very intrigued by it. and wanted to be one of the first people to look at that in a consumer products context here in the UK, which led us to be one of the first, if not the first brand here in Europe to launch a CBD drink several years ago, before a lot of the challenges that currently exist in the market. So I guess my journey to the plant was one that happened through a commercial endeavour that lent itself quite nicely to CBD as a consumer product.
Well, it sounds like you were led to plants in general, functional plants with phytonutrients, of which cannabis is one amongst many. Do you have in your stablemates, I don't know, a hierarchy? Is CBD working for you better than others? Could you have been on a ginseng podcast?
We could. I mean, before CBD, which is what we've very much become known for now, we were pioneering the use of adaptogens, kind of plants that kind of help to moderate stress responses. So we've for a long time been using really interesting ingredients that people hadn't really heard of before, some of them with similar challenges, novel food challenges to CBD, actually. So it's a kind of a path that we're quite familiar with. And, there's we like things like ashwagandha, we like different ginsengs, we always use them. But I think what's unique about CBD is because of the cultural heritage around it, it's quite unique in its ability to grab mainstream attention. And that's led for us to a real shift in the business in terms of where we focus our time and attention, which is very much on the plants now, the cannabis plants.
But that does make me wonder, what's your interactions been like with the international cannabis community? Because from many different accounts or many different stories, the grammar there's a bit funny, but people find their way into the cannabis industry from many different paths, often from less professionalized ones than investment banking. Have you been interacting with cannabis entrepreneurs in America and seen a difference to how CBD drinks there are to here?
Yeah, and I have. I've for want of a better phrase, I've put myself about in the industry, and I've met a lot of the people that are playing it, both from an entrepreneurial perspective and some of the big corporates, and then some of the people who are very focused on regulation. I think it's a relatively small industry, but quite a diverse industry in terms of the people. I think it's probably stood me in relatively good stead that I have quite a formal professional background in an industry that sometimes has suffered from not having that discipline. Mm-hmm. So I think our approach and the approach of the brand has always been in line with, I guess, my background and my kind of approach to business. And I think that has made us stand out a little bit in an industry that's had some challenges with sort of the way in which businesses have been governed and run and built.
Touching on that, how did you find the transition from banking to cannabis? It's quite a sort of significant change. And I guess as an extension of that, once you had launched the business and everything with the company was up and running, were there any links and connections from your previous employment and from the previous sector that you were able to leverage for the venture, which is Botanic Lab?
It's an interesting question. I mean, the jump from investment banking to cannabis wasn't a direct jump for me. So there was kind of a route in between that. When I first left investment banking, I took some time off. I learned to be a yoga teacher. So there was a period of time between that transitioned me into this industry. I think what I found with having now really fully entered the cannabis industry, the stage that it's at right now means that it is of so much interest to the investment world at large. And a lot of my old contacts from my previous world are now looking actively at this market from an investment perspective, or actually playing in this market. There's several people that at certain events that I turn up and I realize there's people that I used to work with, or old colleagues and those kind of things. So it is now proving to be some similarities between those two industries for me, which is interesting, and it's kind of bringing me back to my old world a little bit. And look, my old world has always been very helpful in terms of the financial side of what we're doing and the money raising side of what we're doing. There isn't really a company in this industry right now who isn't looking at raising money or will need to raise money at some point in the near future.
So how did you go about it in the early days? Or did you have enough momentum from the prior functional drinks business that you didn't need to raise funds for the CBD component?
So, yeah, I mean, the CBD component is a part of the business as it exists now. But the way that we've got about fundraising is through individual investors to start with, and then moving into more institutional money. So I've done that in a very investment banker way, I guess. And as we now move more fully into the cannabis world, I think the only difference really here is that the universe of investors is slightly different from where we would have been raising money from previously for just a drinks business. There are different avenues to capital in this industry. And some avenues to capital are closed off in the cannabis industry because some groups of investors aren't quite ready or haven't quite got their heads around this industry yet. So it's a slightly different set of investors, although the process is the same.
That makes me wonder. So you said institutional investors, but I was under the impression that for most cannabis touching businesses, institutional investors are still off limits.
Yeah, I mean, it depends what your definition of institutional is. So here in Europe, we have yet to see the kind of institutional hedge fund type investors come into this market. I don't think it will be very long before they do. I think in order for that money to come into play, what you need is clarity over regulation. And I think we are on the road to that now here in the UK, certainly. But here in Europe, certainly, we haven't seen that come on fully yet.
And we have lots of entrepreneurs that listen to the show, in addition to business owners. If you were going through that initial fundraise now, what are the learnings that you've taken from your previous experience that you would have applied to raising money in 2020?
There's quite a few of them, I think, and it sounds relatively naive given my background, but you always need more money than you think you're going to need. I kind of rather naively underestimated the amount of money that's needed, particularly for consumer products businesses, where there's huge investment required in brand, but also in working capital. Working capital cycles are much harder in these businesses. So you always need more than you think you're going to. I think if I was kind of starting this journey as a cannabis entrepreneur now, I would be looking at alternative sources of capital. So I think there is lots of interest in this sector. And traditionally, if you were starting a kind of business like mine, you would either go to angel investors or you would go to a private equity fund. I think there are other pockets of money around for cannabis businesses, and I think you have to be quite creative about where you find them. Even in the market at the moment, which is incredibly tight and going through a kind of capital crunch period, there are still pockets of money around for interesting business ideas and interesting teams.
Yeah, well, I think the markets at the moment, and as we record this, probably about to go into another drop as Trump announced travel ban. It's quite serious recession on the cards, maybe worse. Do you feel that could affect your business? Do you have international expansion or supply chain risk due to international markets? And not just cannabis markets I'm talking about, but in general.
Yeah, look, I mean, in a consumer products business, a recession is not a good thing, although it's even less of a good thing if you are a premium high price product. People kind of always have to eat and drink and those kind of things. So a recession is not great for us, not great for the industry. I think the cannabis industry from a financial perspective is in turmoil anyway. So it makes the situation much more complex. But I've always maintained that actually in these kind of environments is where opportunity lies. So what we will undoubtedly see over the ensuing 9-month period is we will see some businesses fall away. We will see people run out of capital. And therein lies opportunity for those that are funded and do manage to see the distance. There are opportunities to flourish in that environment. So I think every cloud has a silver lining if you manage to stay the distance.
And Oscar touched upon trading with other countries and sort of international expansion. Would you be able to give us a little bit more of a flavour as to the Botanic Lab line, where you're stocked and where you have expanded or looking to expand into sort of international?
Yeah, I mean, our business is very UK-centric at the moment. We do some trading with selected European countries like the Netherlands, like Belgium and Austria. And Europe is very much a part of our expansion plan in the future over the next 2 years. There are lots of challenges that present itself around that, not least Brexit, which is looming, but also the very different regulatory landscape that exists for cannabis and CBD across Europe at the moment. Now, I strongly believe that in the near term, in the medium term, I should say, those landscapes will coincide. But I think we are some way off seeing that. So as a trading bloc, Europe will be challenging over the next 18 months. But we do still very much see the business as a European business rather than a UK-centric business. And we will also look at opportunities outside of Europe as they present themselves, where regulation allows it.
And on that regulatory piece, in February of this year, in 2020, the FSA announced their novel foods guidance. How have you and Botanic Lab responded to that? And do you think this is a positive thing for the UK and international CPG CBD space?
I think it was a hugely positive announcement, long awaited. And what it gives is guidelines, it gives structure, and it gives a clear route forward for those who are prepared to work with the regulator. And for those who aren't, we will see them disappear. So it was long awaited from our perspective. I've always maintained that regulation in isolation doesn't mean anything. Regulation is an interaction between the consumer product producer, the regulator, and the retailer. And what we've been waiting for over these last 12 months is the ability to give retailers confidence that there's a clear route forward to trading without penalty attached to it. So what this announcement has done is it has given that structure. Now, we'll have to wait to see how retailers respond to that. We're still at the early stages after the announcement, but my assumption and my hope is that that gives retailers the confidence to build their own policy around CBD, work with reputable brands and companies who understand regulation and are working towards the guidelines that the FSA has set out. And hopefully that gives us a really good trading platform to build on, where the last 12 months have been incredibly challenging for CBD consumer products businesses.
So let me rephrase that so I understand it. So you're happy that retailers will have clear top-level guidance on whether CBD can be allowed on their shelves. But to look at it another way, are you not worried about impacts on the supply chain of CBD and your ability to get CBD that has been shown to be safe under novel food regulations? And I believe it's the toxicology reports that are the most onerous ones.
Yeah. I mean, what I think I think regulation is a good thing. So I think the fact that the supply chain will become tighter and will likely see a lot of suppliers cleared out, I think is a positive thing. What it does mean from a business risk perspective is that supply chain and securing supply chain becomes a very pertinent issue for brands like us. And it does mean that potentially in the next 2 years, there may be a tightening in supply chain, possibly increasing in prices, possibly some shortage in supply. I think those are very short-term problems as this regulation just plays out. I think, I strongly believe that in 3 years' time, novel foods will be an issue of the past and everyone will have moved on from that. But I think there is potentially some supply chain challenges over the next 2 years. But at the same time, there are reputable suppliers out there who are working towards novel food. If you know what you're doing and you know who to work with, then I think there is a route forward.
And another aspect of the regulatory side of things actually leads into sort of the branding and advertising piece. As a cannabis business, of course, there are certain things you can and can't do with regards to advertising, promotions, things you can and can't say. How do you guys navigate that as consumer-facing business?
It's interesting. It's something that's always brought up in this area. You can't make claims about these products. That's not unusual. There are very few natural product ingredients. And I mentioned to you at the beginning of the recording that we're used to working with functional plants from different parts of the world, some of which have been novel in the past. It's not unusual to not be able to make a claim about something. I think what we're seeing in the market at the moment is there is no real standout brands in market. I include us in that because the scale of things at the moment is so small. We're just seeing white label product put on shelf, very poorly branded, and no real messaging on that. What we really need to move to get this market to move forward is a brand forward approach where brand storytelling and brand messaging leads, and that's what helps the consumer decide what they're going to buy. Then you don't need to make claims. Then conversations about how much CBD is in something, what are you claiming it can do, is it going to cure this, is it going to cure that, becomes somewhat irrelevant because it's a consumer products brand-led market.
And what would you say are the key customer segments that are the core sort of market and target market for Botanic Lab, and how do you go about interacting with them?
I think as a brand, Botanic Lab is very young and irreverent. It doesn't take itself too seriously. And I think in an industry like CBD, where it can be very cerebral, serious, I think that's quite a positive thing. So our target customer is a very young consumer, so the 20 to 32-year-old, eager to try new products, really engages with, as I said, this irreverent personality of our brand. And really what we're aiming to do is to get to the first-time CBD user. So someone who has maybe heard of it, they haven't tried it, we provide them an easy access point into having that first experience. It's an accessible price point. It's also in a form and a product that they would be used to consuming anyway. One of the challenges, I think, with the CBD market at the moment, where conversation is very much dominated around tinctures and oils, you're asking a consumer to buy a product for potentially £50 to £100 that they don't have an existing habitual need for. They don't have a habit that they take this product in. They don't really know what it's going to do, and we can't really say what it's going to do. And there's no real guidance. And I think retailers and brands are wondering why these products are moving quite slowly. And I strongly believe that the way to build the consumer products market is through products that the consumers are already familiar with. So they already have a relationship with these products and they're trying CBD as a part of that. And that can then lead them on a journey potentially through to other products which are higher value, more specific to CBD, and rather than being a general CPG product.
And with that in mind, do Botanic Lab have ambitions to move further along that value chain as well, to perhaps attract those more, I guess, quote unquote, CBD mature customers after they've had their, I don't want to say gateway drink, but I'm going to say gateway drink.
Have you been reading our business plan? Yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure that would be a great shock to anyone. We actually have a product which will be coming out relatively soon, which is a non-drink product. We have other plans for products that are probably more familiar to the CBD consumer as well. And in our group, we also have other brands that will be coming to market as well, outside of sort of drinks and beverages. So very much our plans are to look at the whole value chain of consumer products and bring the expertise and the knowledge that we have of this market to play, and also the expertise that we have in consumer products and branding to play across a suite of different brands.
I've sort of got a nebulous question formed in my head from that, but I'm just thinking how to phrase it correctly. And it's around the fact that, one, I don't think we've told our listeners some of the great product names you've got here. So, for instance, when you say it's an irreverent brand, we're talking about drinks called Mind Lube and Melodrama CBD drinks. Wonderful names. I'm really familiar. And from this little discussion here, it sounds like you're positioning or transitioning or maybe going to place yourself more in that ibuprofen, arnica cream, that health and wellness, more so than irreverent, young, functional plant drinks. Are you thinking of a repositioning, or will these products come out under a different brand?
No, but Botanic as a brand will remain as fun and irreverent and quirky as it is. We will bring products out under other brand banners as well. So you mentioned certain categories there, which absolutely will be in place.
I can say with fair degree of certainty that my good friend Oscar would certainly be receptive to a CBD product that came in some sort of Huel-esque form. So if that's on the horizon, you've definitely got a buyer over here.
Yeah, actually, I want to stick on the demographic point that Johnny raised a while back and that we're sort of into now, because I find it very interesting. How do brands win in the CBD space? It seems it's so fragmented. It's really hard to say who's doing well, what consumers like. Yet, as Johnny said at the beginning, you've smashed it. You're in Harrods, you're in Waitrose, you're into our international audience, top shelf UK retailers. If there was a blue chip CBD drink, which I think, as you said, there might not be, you're probably looking at one of the first places in it. So how did you get there from a brand and consumer drive? Did you have much marketing? Was it word of mouth?
Well, I think one of the very helpful parts of our journey has been that there is and was an existing brand there with an existing brand characteristics and an existing audience. So when we added CBD into a product, our customers immediately understood it. It worked with our brand and it helped them to understand what CBD was. I think it's obviously helped hugely that we had existing relationships with retailers as well. And many of the retailers that we work with, we don't actually retail CBD with them because they still don't work with that ingredient, but we retail other products with them. So we have we have brand on shelf, but not necessarily with CBD, which is a helpful dynamic in this industry where, we're kind of having to wait to see when retailers get comfortable with this ingredient.
What was it that drove your marketing?
I mean, the real honest answer to that, Oscar, is hard yards and determination. These things don't happen overnight. It does take financial investment. So any kind of marketing drive, you have to spend money to do that. But it's also sheer persistence of, creating good products, continually knocking on the doors, trying things that sometimes don't work, and refining your offering. The offering that we have now is very, very different from where we started, both in terms of the actual product, how it's packaged and how it looks. So I think it's a journey, and often in these businesses you see the success and you think it's happened straight away, and it hasn't. It's a process of a lot of learning, a lot of small failures, and then the successes that come along with that. Clearly in consumer products, though, one of the things that you must have is financial support. And you can have the best product in the world and get it into distribution, but if you don't have the money to drive marketing behind that, it's not going to go anywhere, because you're competing with giants. You're competing with the Coca-Colas of this world, who have limitless budgets and own most of the shelf space. So I think it's very naive to think that you will launch a brand with no money and be able to do anything with it long term.
And on that distribution piece, of course, you're with a number of the sort of key retailers in the UK. You mentioned Coca-Cola, and actually last time I was in a co-op, Botanic Lab drinks were standing right next to the Coca-Cola drinks for folks that are looking to get a meal deal, which is an amazing thing. I'd love to touch upon the retailer aspect of that. Do you find, and have you found as a brand, it's been better for you to go direct to retailers or to sort of approach them indirectly through CPG distributors? And if it's the former, I'd love to get a bit of an insight into how, as a brand, you actually get in front of these retailers to tell them your story?
Yeah, we've taken the direct route, which I think is the most common way of doing this, gone direct to retailers. And I think there are several positives to that approach. The high street, as we know, and retail in general is a very challenging environment at the moment, particularly in kind of grocery, where the budget grocery retailers are taking huge share away from the kind of mainstream Tesco, Sainsbury's. And what that means is that those retailers that are targets of ours have to really look at how they can differentiate offering for their consumers. And that means engaging with brands that are being innovative, that are doing first things in market, so that they can show that they really are providing value add to their customers. So that really plays to our strength, I think. But also from a retailer and a buyer within a retailer's perspective, engaging directly with an entrepreneur and hearing their very genuine brand story is much more exciting than the process of engaging with a Coca-Cola or Coca-Cola's distributor. They're a necessity because they drive a huge amount of revenue in the business. But actually, the more interesting part of that job is engaging with really interesting and unique products and brands. So that, again, really plays to your favor when engaging directly with these retailers. But I don't want to give you a false impression. That's not a simple or easy process doing that. And as I said, it requires a huge amount of determination and thick skin and knockbacks. So it isn't simple, and it does take time. And it's a complicated process.
So amidst all that struggle, which Botanic Lab product did you rely on to get you through?
It's changed during the course of our history, really. One of the original products that we became quite famous for was we were actually the first people to launch a charcoal-based drink to the market, which you see quite often in stores now. But that was the one that I think initially caught the attention of retailers. It was a charcoal-based sports drink, happens to taste really good as well. And that sort of grabbed the attention of retailers and gave us a foothold in to then, once you're in the door, you can start having conversations about new products. And then the second wind of that was when we launched a CBD drink. So you can't sort of move in the market now without seeing some kind of CBD product coming to the market. But 2 years ago, that wasn't the case. So it was very new. It was very unique. There weren't the novel food challenges that there are now. So that's, going to a retailer with something that's very unique is always great. You've got something new to offer them.
But I meant for you personally rather than for your top line. Which are the products you enjoy consuming?
Oh, for me personally, yes. Obviously our Dutch Courage. It's our superhero drink. So I have a fridge in my office which is packed with our drinks, and I have my go-to drinks are either a Dutch Courage or a Yin Yang Yuzu, which is my favourite flavour drink.
And can you describe them for our listeners?
So our Dutch Courage drink is our heralded CBD drink, which is, I personally don't like fizzy drinks. So they're not carbonated, they're still drinks. They're in an aluminium can, and they are all green tea based drinks with then layers of natural flavours and functional plants in them. So Dutch Courage specifically has CBD, hibiscus, sour cherry, some natural sweeteners in there, and green tea. And then Yin Yang Yuzu, which is my personal favourite, is a green tea, yuzu and bitter orange drink. And our yuzu is actually sourced. We use a combination of yuzu juice and yuzu peel, which is sourced from one of the only suppliers in the world in Japan that you can buy that product off. So it's a really special product.
Well, it sounds fantastic having a packed fridge full of those drinks. I know I'd enjoy that in an office. And actually something on that I'd like to touch upon is in terms of how you have built your team and built company culture around Botanic Lab. Could you tell us a little bit or give us a little bit of insight into how the team has grown from the beginning? What were the sort of first few key hires that you've made to really help accelerate things from your side? And also on the company culture point, sort of how important is that to you and Botanic Lab now and moving forward?
I mean, Botanic Lab as a business looks very different now than it did some years ago. When we first launched the business, we had a small manufacturing site. So a large portion of my team were actually within that manufacturing site. And I should probably say, I've done every job in this business. So in day one, I was everything to everyone. Now, obviously, we've grown up a little bit since then. We have a team of about 12 people now, very much focused office-based people rather than factory-based people. And the team, I think, has migrated. One of the things I've had to learn along the way is to not do everything and to focus on the things that are value add and that no one else can do. So that's been, for me, has meant hiring people with real specialisms. Our operations and supply chain team come from another drinks company, and they've really kind of elevated our performance in that area and taken a lot of that away from me. A lot of the brand work, certainly the ideation, still sits with me. And Botanic in particular is it's a very personal brand to me. It's my baby. But as we expand the company and are putting new brands into that group, that will probably change a little bit as well. And we've had to go through a process with advisors in sort of really defining that brand strongly and setting out the brand guidelines so that it's not just a construct of my imagination. It's something that is set in stone. But I think where we've got to now with our team is a group of people who are passionate about this industry, and by this industry I mean cannabis and CBD. They're energized by it. They really, they live the values of our brand. It's not just me now coming up with the quirky names that we talked about. There's a whole team of people coming up with them, and lots of weird and wonderful names, some of which don't get past the sniff test. So it's very much it's not my brand anymore. It belongs to the team and belongs to our customers to a degree as well. And I guess the next phase for us now in building team and building the business is in adding new brands, new products into that. So it becomes, again, you diversify out a little bit further, and the role that I do changes somewhat.
Interesting. I think we've got time for one or two further questions. So I just want to follow up that last point with more focus on the creation of new products. And I'd like to imagine a future world here where some other plant-derived phytonutrients that are just undergoing scientific investigation now, but are currently considered narcotics. Could you imagine a world where Botanic Labs is producing products with those ingredients in 5 to 10 years' time?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, whether it's within Botanic Lab or not, we would have to see at the time. But certainly from a cannabis perspective, THC, recreational cannabis, I think is very interesting. And I think it fits very well with what we do. We would absolutely look at it at the point that it was legal to do so, or when we thought that was coming. Personally, I am very interested in that whole world of ingredients and psychedelics. I think it's a really interesting field, and I think the impact for consumer products particularly is potentially quite interesting. So something that I'm absolutely watching very closely. Whether it fits into this brand or another, I think it's something that we will be looking at in the future.
Yes, well, I look forward to the microdose in the meal deal section of Sainsbury's.
Absolutely. We keep on pushing those retailers and the limits of what they want to do.
Well, you've got them to stock Mind Lube, so the doors can be open.
Absolutely.
Well, Rebekah, I think that's a perfect time to say thank you for coming on Professionally Cannabis. You've been a wonderful guest.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, listener, we hope you enjoyed that episode. And of course, if you did, please do help support the pod by subscribing if you haven't done already, passing the pod on to a friend or colleague, and giving us those all-important likes, shares, and thumbs up. We really are going to do everything we can to keep delivering high-level content to you guys over this period of self and social isolation, no matter how long we are all locked in our homes for. But for the time being, thank you again for listening to the pod, and we will see you next week. Bye now.
Love, please take me above, take me with you.